All right, welcome everyone. Good morning. We are super excited for today's Reverse Book Club with Jessica Ivins, going over Fierce Conversations. This is a book I read a couple years ago, actually, and loved, devoured. So I'm sure after Jessica's recap and class today, many of you guys are going to be reaching for this hard copy Audible. It is a great book for navigating conversations in all aspects of your life. So, Jess, without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining today. As Julia said, somebody recommended this book to me, and I was the same. I completely devoured the book. It is really great. So I'm going to share with you my high-level feedback and takeaways that I learned from the book. And if you find yourself wanting to read the book, I would highly encourage you to do so because it's really great. And personally, I think my presentation's great, but it does not do the book justice. All right, so with that, let's get started. So what is a fierce conversation? A fierce conversation is one in which we come out from behind ourselves into the conversation and we make it real. When you think of a fierce conversation, think passion, integrity, authenticity, collaboration, think culture, transformation, and think leadership. And you might be asking yourself, why have a fierce conversation? Well, what's on the other side of your toughest issue is really worth it. Relief, which is probably the biggest thing. If you know you need to have a conversation with somebody, it's probably weighing pretty heavy on your shoulders. And after you have that conversation, it will feel like 100 pounds is lifted off of you. Success, health, freedom from that stress and that burden, general happiness, a high performing team, fulfilling personal relationship. And if you or someone you know feels that a conversation is needed, it probably is. Fierce conversations are about moral courage, clear requests, taking action. It's an attitude, a way of conducting business, a way of leading, and just a way of life. The very outcome that we fear if we confront someone's behavior is going to guarantee show up if we don't. So I'll say that again. If the very outcome we fear if we confront someone's behavior are practically guaranteed to show up if we don't. So it will just take longer, and the results will likely occur at the worst possible moment when we're least expecting it, with a huge price tag attached to it. So I'm going to leave this slide up. I want you guys to think about that. Have you ever said the phrase, "I am so burnt out"? I know I have said that before, probably weekly or daily. Burnout happens not because we're trying to solve problems, but because we've been trying to solve the same problem over and over. So I'm sure some of you have been there before. Remember that the conversation is the relationship. We talked about that on Tuesday. If you guys were in that meeting, he brought that up. Conversation is the relationship, and many are afraid of real. It's the unreal conversation that should scare us. The unreal conversations are expensive for organizations, for your business, for you personally. In the book, she talks about the corporate nod. I feel like we've all probably been here at one point or the other. How often do you find yourself saying things you don't mean just to be polite? How many meetings have you sat in where the real issues were not being discussed? What has been the economical and emotional cost to the company or your business or your relationship by not identifying and tackling the real issues? So ask yourself, those questions. And if you find yourself agreeing with these, resonating with these, it's probably time that you had a conversation. So, what are the purposes to a fierce conversation? The first purpose is to interrogate reality, provoke learning, tackle tough challenges, and enrich relationships. Our work, our relationships, our very lives succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. So, where do we begin? This is pretty much our starting point to preparing for a fierce conversation. We need to understand the conversation. We need to get real with ourselves. And we're going to be talking about number one here, interrogating reality, in just a minute. These are the 7 principles that she takes you through during the book. The first one is master the courage to interrogate reality, which we're going to get into. Come out from behind yourself into the conversation to make it real. Be here, be prepared to be nowhere else. Tackle your toughest challenge today. Obey your instincts. Take responsibility for your emotions. And let silence do the heavy lifting, which is hard for some of us being in sales to just stay silent. So that is a part of this that you might find challenging. Think of these as your rules that you must follow. Ask yourself, what are you pretending not to know? That's a big question. She talks about that a lot during the book. What are you pretending not to know? I thought that was pretty powerful when you really sit down and think about it. So the first thing that Susan Scott wants us to do before we get into having one of these conversations is do what she calls an integrity scan. And what that means is really just a reflection on yourself. And the purpose of this exercise is to help us recognize the multiple realities about how each of us shows up in the world, not just when we're at our best. She says, if you want to see someone in real pain, watch someone who knows who he or she is and defaults on it on a regular basis. So the first thing that you do for your integrity scan, it's pretty simple. First, she says that you should take your finger and touch your nose. That is where the resolution begins to anything. You're the person who's being held the most accountable. From there, she says, what is a word or phrase that describes you? So if you guys wanted to write this down, you could share if you'd like. What's a word that if me or somebody else or somebody that you know or yourself, what would they describe you as? Is that accountable? Is that a go-getter? Always willing to do what needs to get done? Whatever that is, write it down. The next part is think of a time and a situation when you are exactly the opposite of that. I know when I was reading this book, I started to laugh when I read that because immediately I'm like, oh, there definitely have been times where I was not acting on that word or phrase that I had written down. So again, the point of that conversation is to with yourself is to really recognize where you're maybe falling short in your beliefs. So if your belief is that you are a high integrity person and you can think of some scenarios where you were not acting like that, reflect on those and think about what you could do better moving forward so you're always acting as that word or phrase that you wrote down. Does anyone want to share theirs if they thought of one? No? All right. Okay, let's see. So preparing for your fierce conversation. We've already talked about number one, doing a gut check on how you feel about your life today. Describe key aspects of the future that you desire. Identify conversations that you need to have with others, which we'll do. And before you have that conversation, you'll have one with yourself about an issue that is troubling you. In the book, so going back to the first two here, doing a gut check on how you feel, describing key aspects of the future you desire, the author of this book recommends putting together what she calls a stump speech. This is a speech where you're giving it to yourself and you're prepared to give it to anybody at any point in time, and you feel very confident about it. I'm going to read some passages directly from the book. So she says, first, you will do a gut check on how you feel about your life today. Next, you'll describe key aspects of your future you desire. Third, given the gap between your current reality and your ideal future, you'll identify the conversations you need to have with others. Finally, before you have conversations with anyone else, you'll have one with yourself about an issue that's troubling you. So going back to the stump speech, the questions that you're going to want to ask yourself in this particular order: where am I going? Why am I going there? Who's going with me? How will I get there? Am I realizing my full potential? Is there value and fulfillment in my workday? So I want you guys to think about those, write them down. I'll leave this slide up for a minute. If you find yourself answering, I don't know, ask yourself, what would it be if I did know? All right, I'm going to read another passage here about this that I thought was really great. If you're a leader, taking responsibility for your emotional wake requires that you have a stump speech. The speech you must be prepared to give anytime, anywhere, to anyone who asks or who looks the least bit confused. Your stump speech must be powerful, clear, and brief. What is your story? How would you like to be interpreted? What is the legacy that you want to leave? If the people in your organization could tell one story about you, what would you want it to be? What is the message you wish to deliver to your customers? What wake do you wish to leave following each conversation? So the mineral rights conversation that she talks about in the book, this is a conversation that you're going to have with yourself that will help you explore issues by looking for clarity, improved understanding, and move towards change. So what you're going to do is you're going to write down your responses to each question. Don't edit your responses, just write. So again, I'll leave this up here for you guys if you wanted to participate in this activity. Step one, identify your most pressing issue. The issue that I most need to resolve is, and write that down. Step two, clarify the issue. What's going on? How long has this been going on? And how bad are things? Step number three, determine the current impact. How is this issue currently impacting me? What results are currently being produced for me by this situation? How is this issue currently impacting others? Step number four, determine the future implications. If nothing changes, what's likely to happen? What's at stake for me relative to this issue? What's at stake for others? Examine your personal contribution to this issue. What is my contribution? How have I contributed to this problem? That's a pretty powerful one because a lot of us probably don't want to admit that. Describe the ideal outcome. When this issue is resolved, what difference will that make? What results will I enjoy? Commit to action. What is the most potent step I could take to move this issue towards resolution? When will I take this step? So again, I liked that question a lot. When will I take this step? Definitely a big commitment to taking action is telling yourself when you're going to do it and committing to it. So now that we've learned and gone through the first few steps, write down who you need to have a fierce conversation with. You do not need to share this out loud unless you want to, but write it down wherever you are. Think about it, write it down later, and commit to having this conversation. What are some common mistakes that we make during a one-on-one conversation? First is doing most of the talking. So a lot of us in sales probably can resonate with that since we do a lot of talking. What you need to do, and she talks about this a lot in the book, is you need to listen. And you need to really listen, which we'll be talking about here in just a minute. Number two, taking the problem away from someone. I think we all probably have been there before where we just jump to our advice immediately. Hold your advice. We dive into answers before our companion that we're having a conversation with even has had time to finish what they're trying to say. So let them finish, hold your advice, even if it's the best advice in the world. Not inquiring about feelings. The way someone feels is important. The way we feel is important. And it's not your job to discredit somebody else's feelings or how they're feeling towards an issue. There's really no right or wrong. It's important to discuss your own feelings as well as the other person's feelings and make sure that the other person understands how you feel about the issue as well. Delivering unclear messages, unclear coaching, and unclear instructions. She talks a lot about how we buffer conversations by using things like pillows around our conversation where we just say, "You're doing so great," and I love this project. And then you'll insert, but I think we need to make this change or whatever it is. And she says sometimes we put so many pillows around a conversation that the real issue just becomes unclear or not even present at all. So when you're talking to somebody, you really want to say things like, your job is on the line, and say it clearly, cleanly, and calmly. And that's it. Number 5, canceling the meeting. This just shows the person that you don't feel like it's that important to you. So avoid canceling the meeting, avoid interruptions, be there and be prepared to be nowhere else. Running out of time. This is an important conversation. Make sure you leave the conversation where you're both feeling satisfied. So take as much time as you need. Don't put a timer on and just sit there and have the conversation. And number 8, assuming your meeting is effective. So following these guidelines and going back to those rules we talked about, if you're following the model, just like everything else in our business, you're going to have an effective conversation. But don't assume that it's effective if you're not following the model and you're not delivering clear messages, coaching, instructions, you're checking your phone every 2 minutes. That's also not the right way to have this conversation. In the book, Susan says her secret rule is questions only. We talk a lot about that in real estate. The person who's asking the questions is holding the conversation. It's the same goes here. So always just ask questions. So listening, she talks a lot about this in the book. One quote that she says, "It's amazing how this seemingly small thing, simply paying fierce attention to another, really asking, really listening, even during a brief conversation, can evoke such a wholehearted response. Think about while someone's talking, where are your thoughts? Are you even paying attention? I know I've been there before, have a million things going on, and it goes in one ear and out the other. I'm sure you guys can think of a scenario where you've been there too. We must transform the way we speak, the way we ask, the way we listen. Many think that speaking when someone is talking is the same as listening. Just because you're responding does not mean that you're actually listening to that person and listening to what they're saying. Going back to what she talks about, silence is key. Don't take the conversation away from other people and fill the air with your stories. So we probably all have been there again, where we are listening to somebody talk and it sparks a memory that we just want to share with somebody about our own past experience. In the book, she talks about how when we do this, we're guaranteed to lose the other person. And at that point, the conversation is completely dead. They've lost interest, you've lost interest, and you're not even on the topic anymore. Take the pulse of the relationship by really asking and really listening. Who did most of the talking? If the answer is me, that's not the right answer. So a lot of us who have taken bold will recognize this. No more buts. Removing the word but from your vocabulary and replacing it with and is the best thing that you could do for yourself. When we have the word but involved, we create competing realities. So when we say, this is true, but this is true too, multiple realities are competing, and I have to choose one or the other. Now, when you replace but with and, this is true and this is true. Multiple realities are not competing, they just exist, and you own a piece of the truth, and so do I. I'll read a quote from her book about how this looks in real time. So from the book, she says, "You can count on me to tell you what I think and feel and how I've arrived at my perception. I invite you to do the same, especially if you disagree with my view. Our differing perspectives are invaluable. After all, our goal is to make the best possible decisions for the company, not to be right about our individual points of view." So now that we've gone through at a very high level about how to prepare for a conversation, what the ins and outs of a fierce conversation are, we're ready to get our 60-second opening statement prepared. So she has multiple steps to do this, and I'll be reading from the book as well. The first one is naming the issue. So you have to identify what the issue is first. From there, you need to select a specific example that illustrates the behavior or situation that you want to change. Describe your emotions around the issue. Clarify what is at stake. And that's pretty powerful when you ask yourself that question. And she says in the book, make sure that you use that word. What is at stake? Identify your contribution to the problem. Indicate your wish to resolve the issue. And then finally, invite your partner to respond. After step 7, and I'm going to give you guys a few examples after this of opening statements. After step number 7 is then when you get into the interaction phase. So this is where reality is interrogated. The other person is talking, you're listening, you're asking questions, and you're saying things like, please say more about this. I see it differently, so I'd like to understand your thinking, how you came to this conclusion. And then step number 9 is moving towards resolution. So this is where we talk to that person, we feel good about the conversation that we have, and we decide together how we're going to resolve the issue. So I put together some example statements here. These are probably not perfect, and I used Mike's name for the person that I'm having the conversation with because he was the person that I was thinking of at the time. um, so these are related to sales, but again, you can have this conversation around any topic. So the first one is if you're talking to a seller. So our issue is the seller, he won't reduce his list price. The example is he's refusing to listen to feedback. You are very concerned about this. What is at stake? If he doesn't sell his house, he can't move to Florida. Identifying your contribution, you did not provide enough market data. So what does this conversation look like? Mike, I want to talk with you about the current list price of your home. I learned that when my assistant went over the recent feedback that mentioned the price being too high, that you told her that you would rather take the house off the market than reduce the price. I'm really concerned and I'm fearful of the consequences of not listening to the feedback that we're getting. There is a great deal at stake. Remember that if we do not sell your home here in Cleveland, then you will not be able to afford to move down to Florida to be with your grandchildren, which was your number one goal when we first spoke. My role in this is that I have not properly relayed comparable sales consistently with you and went over current market data. This is what I want to resolve with you, Mike, where your home fits within the current market based on the data and going back to your goal of moving down to Florida. I want to understand your perspective. So please talk to me about what you feel the right price for your home is. Obviously, that's probably not an issue in today's market. But I think you get the gist. And, of course, when I'm reading, I wrote this down. When you start to get the hang of it, it won't sound so scripted and it'll come naturally to you. It all comes with practice. And I also created an example for a buyer, which might be a little bit more relevant today. So the buyer is looking at homes that don't meet their criteria. They only want to look at homes that fit their needs, or you want them to only look at homes that fit their needs. So you're very concerned. What's at stake is the buyer is missing out on homes that do fit their needs because they're spending time looking at other homes that don't. And your contribution is that you have not been setting the right expectations and you've been allowing them to look at these properties that they shouldn't have been looking at. So how does this conversation look? So again, I'm talking to Mike. Mike, I want to talk with you about our home search process so far. Several homes we have seen lately are all outside of the criteria that we originally sat down and discussed when we first met. We saw a home that had 2 bedrooms, yet you need 4 for your growing family. We also saw homes in Lakewood when we knew you wanted to be 15 minutes from your job in Solon. I'm really concerned and I'm fearful of the possible consequences. There's a great deal at stake. While we have been looking at homes that do not match your original criteria, we're missing viewing homes that do fit your needs. Oops, sorry about that. So while we have been looking at homes that do not match your original criteria, we're missing viewing homes that do fit your needs. In this highly competitive market, it's imperative that we truly pinpoint what you need and only focus on homes that match that criteria. My role in creating this is that I didn't bring you back to your original set of needs and allowed us to see homes that are not in that criteria and perhaps missing out on others. This is what I want to resolve with you, Mike, what your needs are, what we need to focus on in your home search. I want to understand what is happening from your perspective. So please talk to me about what you're thinking and what homes we should be looking at. Does anyone have any questions on anything that I've talked about or any of these examples that we went over before I move on? All right. So one of my favorite quotes that I think she said in the book, it was surrounding gratitude, which we talk a lot about that at KW, as you all know. And she says, so often people forget that one of the fiercest conversations that any of us can have is to tell someone how important he or she is in our lives and how much we value and love that person. Now, this can be true to anybody that's in your personal life or your business. Just recognizing that person and giving gratitude is huge, and it goes a long way, and it's a great way to soften any conversation that you need to have with that person. This was my favorite quote from the book. All conversations are with myself, and sometimes they involve other people. So I want you guys to say that a few times in your head. It really resonated with me because it's true. So when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm really having it with myself. And it is really just involving that person. I'm not really having the conversation with anybody else but myself. And here are a few takeaways that I have from the book. We can have the conversations needed to create the results we say we want in our lives, or we can have all of our reasons why we can't have those conversations. We can't have both reasons or results. We get to choose. So I think for those of us who have taken bold, sounds a little familiar, right? When the conversation is real, change occurs before the conversation has ended. So that's just going back to following that model, following your system. And if you're on the right track with the conversation, you're already in the right direction for change. As a leader, you get what you tolerate. People do not repeat behavior unless it's rewarded. So this one, I thought a lot about the example that I shared with you guys that I created with my buyer and showing him properties that did not meet his criteria. I was rewarding him in my fake scenario by showing him those properties, and he, that behavior, he was rewarded. So obviously I had to regroup with myself first and then with him to get us back on track. And again, we talked about this earlier. What are you pretending not to know? So if you haven't written anything down, I would recommend writing this down and thinking about it. In your life, in your personal life, in your business, what are you pretending not to know? What are you just brushing to the side? What are you ignoring? Thinking that it's just going to go away. Many of us are afraid of real. It's the unreal conversation that should scare us. Unreal conversations are expensive for organizations, individuals, businesses, teams, personal, wherever you are in your life. We need to get real. That's what she talks about. Healthy relationships require appreciation and confrontation. Confrontation, she also talks about this. Confrontation does not mean going into battle. It means searching for the truth. So any healthy relationship, you should have appreciation and confrontation. If you know something must change, then know it is you who must change it. Everything, like we talked about before, everything starts here with you. Confront does not mean argue or beat up. Confront means searching for the truth. And I'll leave you guys with some questions to ask yourselves. What is currently impossible to do that, if it were possible, would change everything? Now, some of us who have read The One Thing, that definitely made me think about that book. So what is currently impossible to do that if it were possible would change everything? What are you trying to make happen in the next 3 months? So you'll see she put 3 months there because we have to put some type of timeline on what we want to make happen. What's the most important decision you're facing? What's keeping you from making it? What's keeping you from having that conversation? Is it fear? Fear of not knowing how to have the conversation, fear of how that person might respond to that conversation? Well, go back to everything we talked about in the beginning of the book. By not having that conversation with somebody, it's expensive in more ways than none. What conversations are you avoiding right now? If you were to hire a consultant for your business or your personal life, what would you advise yourself? I thought that was a good question to ask, because you really have to get real with yourself. If you were looking at yourself from the outside in, what do you think? What do you think about where you are? What do you think about the people you're working with or your people in your personal life, the way you're feeling, the conversations that you're not having? How does that make you feel? What would you advise yourself if this was somebody else? And that's it. That's the end of my presentation. um, like I said in the beginning, my presentation certainly did not even give the book the justice that it deserves. This is a fantastic book, and if you ever find yourself picking it up, I hope that you enjoy it.
Hey, Jessica,
Yeah.
can I mention something? Where this hit me as you were speaking is in particular with buyers right now, because we're in an economy where
Mhm.
interest rates are going up considerably, and if they haven't been able to find a house at 250, by the time they ultimately find something, they might only be able to afford 220. And
Mhm.
so I think you're going to have to start drawing their focus to the real reason they want to move or why they want to be wherever they want to be, and make it happen real, and get them to realize that you're going to have to look past some of these blemishes, and if you want to if you want to establish the goal and deal with some updates, some modernization, those things down the road.
Yep. Those conversations are definitely not easy to have with your buyers right now.
Yeah.
So hopefully this helps you with figuring out at least where to start. Some of us might not even know where to start to have that conversation with our buyers. Use this as a model and a guide to having that conversation and just bringing your buyer back. What are you looking for? What are your needs? Let's talk about those. Let's look at the houses we've seen. Let's look at the houses that are available and what we need to do. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have any comments or takeaways, questions? We have plenty of time.
Uh, uh, I remember someone saying talking to about resolving conflict or just talking to people, just talking situations out. This minister, he said, when you're talking with somebody, are you listening or are you waiting to speak? So which one is? A lot of times we're waiting to speak, opposed to clearly hearing the person through. And then what I get to that, it is this book and the conversations that they're really for, like if you're having for two mature people. So did she give any, and I know I checked in a little later, did she give any insight in terms of like, if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody who's not as mature to deal with the reality, and someone who wants so many pillows, and just say, this is a situation. Did she give any insight on how to deal with those people?
She did, Art. And that's a great point. We might not be able to have this conversation with everybody. And what she talks about in the book is we can't change who somebody is at their core. And that really resonated with me when I was reading this book, because like you said, there's some people that we're just not going to be able to have this conversation. Even if we follow this model perfectly, they still might be defensive. They might not want to talk. And her advice is bring this person back home. So she recommends saying something like, Art, let's get back on the topic. So if you're having the conversation with somebody and they're steering in the wrong direction or they're going off on a tangent, simply saying, can we please get back to the topic that we're here to talk about today? And just continuing to steer them in the right direction. Now, are you always going to be able to come to a resolution with somebody? Maybe not, because again, we can't change who somebody is on the inside as much as we would love to do that. You know, it's going to take two. A conversation is between two people, and it's the relationship. The conversation is the relationship.
Did she say anything in terms of, you know, you bring out a point where you can help the person, but they're constantly making reasons or excuses or justifying why they're doing things that doesn't, to me, doesn't make sense. You know, I mean, I guess, like you say, you can have reasons, or results, but you can't have both all. But, and so did she say anything about that? Just curious.
Well, I can look in my notes, Art, and get back to you. I have a bunch of stuff highlighted from the book, and I can share with you what section she talks about, all of that. But what the point I think is you need to have a conversation with that person. You need to just tell them, going back to our one slide about having the conversation. Let's see, you need to name the issue. So what's your issue? Your issue with this person is they're not listening to you, or they're not doing what you want them to do. Give them examples, describe how you're feeling, clarify what's at stake. What's at stake is we're going to lose clients, or I'm not going to meet my goals because of your actions that you outline in number 2. Identify your contribution to the problem. I think that's huge. Indicate that you want to resolve the issue, and then respond. So let them jump in, let them say what they need to say. So to answer your question, I think if I were the author of this book, that's probably what I would tell you to do.
Sure, thanks.
Hi.
Anyone else?
Hi.
Hey, Nancy.
Hi. I read this book with my book club, and it is a fantastic book. I've read it a while ago. And you really do, you can take your business or you could take your personal life and go through each number and really learn to, I'm a bad listener, so it really was good for me. And I'm thinking about the talking, what am I going to say next? So I stopped doing that because I know how ridiculous it is. It doesn't get me where I want to go. So
Nancy, I think when it says you're not a good listener, it doesn't mean hard of hearing. It just means that you're not.
Oh, you're teasing. I'm both. No, it's really a marvelous book. Marvelous book. I recommend it to a lot of people, especially guys.
Fair enough.
It really is. So I hope you guys got some good takeaways. I know the point of this is to not have to read the book, but I think as you can get, the consensus is that it's so amazing that you really should read it. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about or share? Questions?
Just a big thank you, Jess, for doing this and bringing some really hyper relevant business examples to the conversation. I feel like when we read a book like this, so often we're thinking about like, to Nancy's point, your personal life or your, it's like, oh, like, I don't know, like, I don't work for some Fortune 500 company. Do I need to have fierce conversations? But every time you're in a deal, there's probably an opportunity for a fierce conversation with the other agent, with your buyer during. I mean, how many times have we we've drafted an ROC that has 15 items on it, and we need to help but having this framework, right, is so powerful because we don't have to know everything. We don't have to be slick salespeople. We just need to communicate. And this is a very, very tight framework to get everything out on the table and then listen and ask questions.
And to add to that, Mike, she talks a lot about number 4 here that you see on this slide, clarifying what is at stake, and actually saying, like I did in my 2 examples, this is what's at stake. So if you're going back to your ROC conversation, talking to the other agent, this is what's at stake. So we need to figure this out.
Right. I love it. I really appreciate it. And
this was fun.
Yeah, I feel like every time we do a book, the feedback is like, hey, this is a great content. So you actually have to go read the whole thing.
Yeah. There really is no replacement for this book. So it's really great. If you look at my copy that I have here, it's fully highlighted. There's so many highlights in it. Tons of great takeaways. Well, thank you guys so much for letting me do this and talking with me. If you have any questions after this, or you want to talk or practice having a fierce conversation, I'm always happy to do that too.
Thank you so much, Jess, for your leadership on this and for giving us some of your time. And I guess for using me as an example, although it was a little
got to get down to your grandkids in Florida.
That's yes, those little rugrats. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Jess. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.